Hey, everybody. Oh, look. Look at the mess that is you. Come on. Ridiculous. There we go. Already troublemakers. How is everybody? Are you ready for me to lull you to sleep? All you lovely people. I'm great. I'm great. Let's get this fire going for you, Leah. I got you. I got you, boo. Okay, which button is it? I changed all my buttons. I shouldn't have done that. Mm, mm. Where did you go? You should be right there. Schmucky cookie. Hey, buddy. All right, let me get your chat situation situated real quick so you can see you. Bum, 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 bum. There we go. All right. So let's get this fire going. How's that sound? Ta-da. I hope you're ready. I am ready. I have I have been looking forward to this all day. So of course, let me once again remind you who's holding down the fort while we're gone. The amazing Chim. All right. All right, so we are starting on page 45. The most beautiful day of our lives. Yoongi, 22 May, year 22. Finally, we saw the shore outside the window. We all stared at it, but nobody spoke. The sky was clear. As if they should be, the sky was blue and the clouds white. Because we were in a fast-moving car, the outside scenery looked still, but not lifeless. Being in that space where the sky, the ocean, and the shore all came together, my heart fluttered with excitement. No matter how long I stared at it, I couldn't get used to its force of life and vitality. It showed us clearly how gigantic the world was and how, conversely, how insignificant we were. The fastest speed we could generate was probably one tiny movement in this world. And suddenly, I had a question. Why had we come all the way to the beach? Jin, 22 May, year 22. I don't know why, but I stopped. Soon, Jungkook would say he'd like to take a picture. In front of Jin's car. Jungkook would point to my car and Jimin would climb up on the hood, followed by Tae, Hobie, Jungkook, and Yoongi. When Junie would shake his head as if to say no one could stop these guys, I'd set the camera timer and walk in front of it. Out of the blue, so many moments swirl around in my head. The pouring sunlight, happy faces, laughter, the fishy smell of the ocean, the camera shutter. "Jen, hurry up!" The voice calling me. All of it popped up and disappeared before I could hold on to it. Going through countless time loops, I came here again and again to take a picture, but I had forgotten about it. I grabbed my head and turned around. It felt as if a sandstorm was blowing through my head. Every moment at the beach was bright, painful, and aching. I couldn't bear the torment and sorrow. I didn't know why. Next came the physical pain, the similar emotion and the similar pain that I had felt at Junie's container. But it was much worse and vicious compared to the last time. "There will be a price." Is this the price that the voice meant? The unexpected headache I have to endure? I didn't mind it if I could find a clue to end this cycle. Even if I had known that I'd be subject to god-awful headaches, I would have chosen to find a clue and pay that price. I had to be cool-headed, more rational, so that I could save myself from the never-ending cycle of time. Tay, 22 May, year 22. "Let's take a picture here," Jungkook said to Jin. Without waiting for his answer, he pointed to Jin's car. Jimin climbed up on the back hood, followed by Yoongi and Hobie. Jin stayed where he was, frowning. He still took out his camera and set it up in front of us. Hobie gestured for him to join us, but Jin shook his head, looking stoic. After pressing the camera shutter, he peeled his eyes off the camera. I walked toward Jin, not because I was particularly concerned with how he was. As the sun set behind him, I saw his face. In the pained look on his face, so many other expressions also surfaced. And in one moment, our eyes met, but lost in a thought, he didn't even realize that. "Are you okay?" I went closer to Jin. He was himself, the Jin that I'd known. That was the only way I could describe him. He was the Jin that I'd met 2 years ago, the real Jin, the one who smiled awkwardly when teased by his friends who were younger than him, the one who seriously listened to his friends' troubles, and the one who always hesitated and thought about what would be a better choice for us. Soon afterwards, I was faced with a different Jin, the one with the same expression as when he had been caught by Junie while talking to the principal in the classroom. I remembered his eyes from back then, his eyes that said, "I don't know how it happened. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how to get out of this. Help me." He pulled out the Polaroid picture and turned around. The others were still joking around on the rear hood. Before I could say anything, he turned around. With his head in his hands, it was obvious he had a headache, and he crumpled up the picture and threw it on the ground. And he started walking towards the observatory. I picked up the picture and smoothed it out. I didn't want the time we'd spent together to be ruined. With the picture in my pocket, I followed him. Jin, 22 May, year 22. "I don't need anyone's help, and I don't help anyone," I told Tay. I had come to this observatory countless times, but this was the first that Tay had followed me here. Each time loop was inevitably different, but this time it irked me that Tay was doing different things. Tay said, "Do you remember the time we came here as high schoolers? We looked for the boulder that was said to grant us our wish, and we walked all the way here, sweating, only to find out it had been shattered to pieces. Did you make a wish then?" Instead of answering him, all I said was, "Let's go down. I'm going to go down too." I tried not to sound too cold. If Tay had jumped off from the observatory, everything would have been in vain. Remember how you and I went around looking for Yoongi back in those days? We were afraid that he would get kicked out of school because he had been cutting classes. So we went around the whole city looking for him, Tay continued. And Junie got sick, so we tried to cover for him at the gas station, and his boss gave us hell. Why would I remember that stuff? I couldn't keep my cool and ended up blurting it out. Tay looked up at me and continued. Do you remember the first day we met? We were late and had to clean up the classroom as punishment. And the time you bought me and Jimin jajangmyeon on the first day of school? Tay spoke in a shrill voice as if he were demanding an answer. I told him again, why would I remember that stuff? Tay lunged at me and grabbed my shoulder. Caught off guard, I staggered. For one moment, I almost lost my balance and came close to falling off the observatory. Because Tay pulled me, I fell forward on the ground. Tay almost screamed. Are you going to forget me soon? Jimin too? And Jungkook? And Junie? Do you know who you are? Tears were about to trickle down from his bewildered eyes. He looked straight into my eyes and said, I know you're helping us. I don't know how. I can't explain it. Tay stammered and seemed as if he didn't know what he was saying, but he still continued. What I mean is, you were there for Yoongi. You called and you went to the hospital. I mean, the emergency door on the second floor. What I mean is, what is wrong with you? Why have you changed so much? What's the problem? You have to tell us so that we can help you. I didn't look away and listened until Tay finished. I was sad and angry at the same time. Tay said I helped them, but that wasn't true. I did what I had to do to break away from the time loop. They want to help me? It almost made me smirk. Tay must have thought I had a problem. I did have an important task, finding the map of the soul, preventing the accident on September 30th. But they couldn't help me with it. I shoved him away and said, I don't need anyone's help, and I don't help anyone. Hobie, 22 May, year 22. Blocking the sunlight with my hand, I looked up at the observatory. Jin climbed up first and Tay followed him, and I suddenly had deja vu that this had happened before. Not only me, but everyone was looking up at the observatory. Jimin said, do you remember the beach we went to before? With the boulder that granted us our wish? Is this the same place? The next moment, Tay and Jin reeled as if they were about to fall from the observatory, and the sandstorm began to blow. I covered my face with my arms and closed my eyes. I wanted to see what was going on at the observatory, but I couldn't open my eyes in the whirl of sand. I heard the whirling sound of wind and felt the coarse sand on my skin for a while. It took a couple minutes for the wind to subside. When I finally opened my eyes, Jin was coming down and Tay was still standing at the observatory, looking down on Jin. Jimin, 22 May, year 22. Everything happened all at once. Jin came down and left just like that. Hobie asked Tay what had happened, but he wouldn't say a word. We couldn't stay at the reserved lodge by the beach because the reservation was under Jin's name. But that wasn't important. We would have decided to go back even if that hadn't happened. No one said it, but we all started heading back to the station. I was walking behind everyone. It had been only a couple of days since I ran away from the hospital. I felt awkward around everyone except for Hobie. I looked at Tay, who was walking next to me. I called his name, but he didn't hear me. Are you okay? I asked him again. Tay looked up and started walking faster. I didn't know what else to do but to walk with him. Tay called Junie. I have a favor to ask. Junie stopped and said, What? His face looked strangely distorted. Tay went closer to him. But Junie suddenly turned around and started walking in big strides. Obviously, he hadn't heard Tay, or he didn't want to hear what he had to say. It was a flat refusal. Tay just stood there watching him, and slowly he lowered his head. Jin, 22 May, year 22. When I couldn't see the beach anymore, I took my foot off the accelerator. The sun had set long ago. The road was empty and dark. The headache would not go away, neither would the sense of disquietude. It wasn't like me to get all worked up like this, and I didn't know how to calm down. I looked in the rearview mirror and was reminded of Tay's face. Are you going to forget me soon? Jimin too, and Jungkook, and Junie? Jungkook's voice was also ringing in my head. Let's take a picture here. The countless pictures I'd taken there by the beach flipped through my head, which felt as if it would explode. I opened my eyes at the loud honking sound and saw the headlights right in front of me. As a reflex, I turned the wheel. The tires skidded against the asphalt and shook the whole car. I stepped on the brake, but it took a while for the car to halt. The car crashed into the opposite guardrail and finally stopped. I heard a scraping sound, but I didn't think it was a serious accident. I opened the car door and stepped out. I felt the cold breeze. Either from the tension or the headache, my neck was all sweaty. The road was empty of cars. The car that was flashing its lights was also gone. I felt frustrated. Why did I say yes to that contract in the first place? Why did I have to go through the same thing again and again? How could I save Junie? And where was the map of the soul? Contract. Finding my own place, keeping the places for each other. Junie, 12 June, year 22. After our trip to the beach, we didn't call each other. I knew what everyone would be up to. Yoongi was probably cooped up in his workroom, and Hobie was going back and forth between Two-Star Burger Joint and the dance room. Jungkook was waiting for school vacation to start, and Jimin had probably left Hobie's rooftop room and returned home. I was also trying to maintain my daily routine by working hard at the gas station. We all had our own life to live and things that were urgent or important to us. As if nothing had happened, we were returning to our places. From time to time, I remembered what Tay had said at the beach. To be truthful, I was often reminded of his words and tormented by them. His words also brought back the memories of the village and the countryside that I thought I'd forgotten. On that stormy winter day, what had Jong-hoon wanted to tell me? If I had listened, would things have changed? What did Tay want to ask me that day at the beach? Tay didn't seem like his usual self, looking serious and desperate, as if there was something he must do. I didn't stay to listen simply because I got scared, not because I was reminded of Jong-hoon. I kept my distance because I didn't want to hear his desperate request and be put in the situation of having to choose either refusing or ignoring the request, the way I had always done. I felt pathetic. With my head hanging low, I left work. Before I left the countryside village that winter, I went to Jong-hoon's house. I had nothing to say, no apologies to offer, no truth to convey. I just felt that I should. Maybe I wanted to tell them it wasn't his fault, to offer my condolences and share their grief. I didn't think it would comfort them in any way. Maybe I just wanted to feel more at ease about it. When I looked up, I saw Tay's graffiti by the bus stop. Tay had been arrested once for painting there. Even at the police station, Tay kept smiling and responding with guff, and got reprimanded by the police more because of it. I asked him when he got out of the station, "What are you so happy about?" Tay said, "There is no reason not to be happy. The weather is great. The graffiti turned out awesome. I ran like hell with you, and we got arrested together and got out together." I laughed in disbelief, and seeing that, Tay laughed himself silly. I added then, "When something worries you, don't keep it to yourself. I probably can't take care of it, but I can be a good listener." And I meant it. For someone like Tay, who was kind and down on his luck, he needed somebody to lean on, even if that someone was nobody like me. When I said it, I really meant it. But it ended up being a lie. I took out my phone. I looked for Tay's number. "You busy? There's a place we should go together." The village in the countryside in broad daylight looked exactly the same. The old road signs, the empty road, and the stream flowing to the river. Only the season had changed. Tay got out of the bus and stretched. The bus left, kicking up dust. A scooter sputtered on its way to the part of the village with the rest area. During the bus ride, I had told Tay about what had happened, the delivery competition I was in to make a living, the accident on the day of the snowstorm, and how Tay was killed, and how the village people had reacted to his death. Some things I couldn't tell him, how I ran away leaving my family behind, and the last words of Tay. Did I regret what had happened? No. There wasn't anything I could do. I didn't come back to apologize for the past. I came back to see for myself what it meant to have survived, the only thing that was on my mind when I left this place. I headed to the slope to get to the rest area. "It's too hot for June," Tay said. "It's going to get hotter." We chatted about unimportant things on our way up the slope. I pushed Tay to continue when he gave up, and leaning against me, he bent his head backward. The sun was too bright that we couldn't keep our eyes open. I stopped at where Jung-hoon had died. "This must be the place." The mark on the side of the road was long gone. I lay down on the spot where Jung-hoon had been killed. With my eyes closed, I tried to picture his last moments. When did his scooter skid? It had been a while since the snowstorm, so the empty road must have been covered with heavy snow. When the scooter skidded, Jung-hoon must have grabbed tight onto it. The scooter wheels slid on the calcium chloride and he lost control. As the scooter fell and his body was thrown into the air, what did he see? When he crashed onto the frozen road without a helmet, what did he think? With his dying breaths, what was the last thing that he saw? With his quivering lips and white puffs from his sighs, what did he want to say? As his body became frozen stiff, the blood from his head must have been warm. Enveloped in the chill from that day, my body contracted. The black space in front of my eyes scattered into whiteness. Tay muttered something, but I couldn't hear it. I felt cold and heavy as lead. My mind grew distant, as if I'd been buried under snow. I thought once, I am like a dead person. The night when I was walking home after the trip to the beach, when I ignored Tay saying he had a favor to ask. What did it mean to survive? Being alive? Having a place to sleep and food to eat? Waking up in the morning and going to sleep at night, spending each day like that, not getting involved in the fear that I wouldn't be able to handle the responsibility, turning a blind eye, afraid of regretting it later, not doing a thing in order not to die, not doing a thing, being trapped inside myself, not doing a thing and not doing a thing and continuing not to do a thing. How is that different from being dead? I must have died a long time ago. The scooter sputtering in the snowstorm, the road covered with dead leaves and calcium chloride, and the drops of sweat and the winter wind. The scenes that day on the road unfolded like a film, and as if I had been suspended in mid-air, I looked down on it. My body evaporated, and only my consciousness remained. It was a hot summer day, but I trembled from cold. It felt as if it was snowing. I felt the pang in my thigh from the scooter accident. Jung-hoon was not the only one who died on that winter day. I ran away, but I also died that day. To survive, I had to kill myself. Junie! I heard Tae's voice and someone shaking my shoulder. Hearing his voice, I finally snapped out of it. The chill I had been feeling vanished, and I felt the heat from the asphalt. I opened my eyes to see Tae looking down on me. You seemed dead. I grabbed his hand and stood up. I took out the piece of the scooter headlight from my pocket and placed it on the road. I had picked it up when I came here that winter. I said bye in my head. Suddenly, Tae put his hand down on the road where I had been laying and said, "We shouldn't die." On the way down to the village by the river, we stopped at the entrance. The place was high enough that we could see the whole village. Tae picked up a stone and threw it into the river, and the stone flew in an arc and plopped into the water. For a while, we stood there looking at the ripples where the stone had disappeared. "What's on your mind?" Tae asked. Without a word, I pointed to the house near a Zelkova tree. Tae didn't ask whose house it was. Someone opened the door and came out of the house. My mom. My mom, with a towel around her head, placed some stuff into a straw basket and disappeared into the house. I had known Tae for a long time, but I had never invited him home. Well, not just Tae. I never brought anyone home because of my sick dad, but also because I didn't want anyone to know how I lived. Maybe because I didn't want to admit it, even to myself, the state that I was in. "Aren't you going to go?" Hearing Tae's question, I shook my head. Shaking his head, Tae said, "Man, that's harsh. If it was me, since I was here and all, but it's like you, mean and cruel Mr. Know-It-All, who never listens to others, never shares his worries, tries to solve things all by himself, makes sacrifices all by himself, acts like a grown-up by taking all the burden, and can't even tell other people about it." Tae stood up, still needling me and pretending as if nothing I did would stop him. I followed him. We ran down the slope. Unlike when we were walking up to the place, the sun didn't feel too hot. With the wind blowing behind us, going down was much easier. The sun was setting on the day in early summer. After we passed by an orchard on the outskirts of the village, I stared at the house with a blue gate. It was Jung-hoon's house. No one lived there now. The last time I came to see my mom, she told me that they ran away from the place. The small village also wanted to forget Jung-hoon's death. Something felt boiling up inside me. I pulled my shirt tighter, although I had no means to button it. "Are you okay?" Tae asked. Instead of an answer, I said, "You said you had a favor to ask when we were at the beach last time. Tell me now. Let's see if we can handle it together." I saw the bus coming our way. At that moment, Tae took out his phone, and with a startled look on his face, he said, "Jungkook." Jin, 13 June, year 22. I walked past the front door and saw a couple of shoes. I asked the housekeeper, and she said they were from the Scholarship Foundation. I looked in my dad's den. I knew what they must be talking about. I knew what the people from the foundation, including my dad, were up to. Funny how I knew their future, which they themselves didn't. The redevelopment plan, which they were having such a heated discussion about, would start on the 20th, and the demolition of the containers would begin on September 30th. When I went closer to the den, I saw Uncle Junho eavesdropping by the door. I heard a voice from inside that the plan should be implemented faster. He was the president of Yungjin Engineering and Construction. The redevelopment plan was led by the foundation members. The foundation pursued academic progress and equal opportunities, but in reality, their goal was to realize profit using their power and money. In the process, they kept things out of sight, giving illegal favoritism to some. By manipulating the votes, they won the right to a construction job, changed the building plan, and signed a contract under the table. Needless to say, my dad was in the middle of all of it. Uncle Junho was his right-hand man who made the deals and handled all the details. I called him Uncle, but he was not related. He was my dad's junior in college, and I grew up with him because he started working for my dad when he jumped into politics. Uncle Junho was my dad's aide, but he gained our trust by handling not only my dad's work, but things around the house as well. Hearing my dry cough, Uncle stepped away from the door, surprised. To hide his embarrassment, he asked me when I got home. He wasn't ambitious or had a great dream, he just needed money. In one of the time loops, he got into trouble and got arrested because of money. He probably knew everything already of the things he was listening to by the door. He was eavesdropping because they were deciding on something which was important to him. I saw Hobie's text when I turned around from Uncle Junho and headed to my room. I closed the text. Hobie had found out about Jungkook's accident just then. It wasn't important. I tried to prevent the accident from happening and also fretting over when and how the accident took place. But I realized Jungkook's accident had nothing to do with the loop. It was just one of those accidents that could happen to anyone. When you leave your wound, it heals by itself and things go back to the way they were. You get scars or disability, but that is your problem to deal with. Even if you get killed in an accident, there is nothing one can do about it. Jungkook, 13 June, year 22. When I opened my eyes, I saw Hobie's and Jimin's faces. Every time I blinked, their faces kept appearing and disappearing again. "Are you okay? Are you in pain?" Jimin asked. "You should have called us. Don't we mean anything to you?" Hobie sounded so upset. I had woken up in the hospital 2 weeks ago. They said it was 10 days ago when I had the accident. I came to, but with pain. Because of the sedative, I felt numb all day and couldn't remember things even from moments ago. I couldn't tell what was real, what was a dream, what was memory, and what was illusion. Everything seemed faint. And I would have dreams. I am floating in mid-air, and when I look down on the hospital bed, I see another me. The me on the bed is asleep. He must be dreaming because his eyes move under the eyelids. And out of the blue, he opens his eyes, and our eyes met. In the next moment, I'm lying on the bed dreaming about the night of the accident. The headlights become the moon and change into marble-like green and blue lights. When I open my eyes, I see another me floating up in the air, and our eyes meet. We exchange glances, and our consciousnesses switch. I become the one in the air and the one on the bed. The switches happen faster, and I become dizzy and nauseous. And I would wake up panting, sweating, and feeling nauseous. And I remembered something I had forgotten. A voice saying, "It'll be more painful to live than to die." "Are you okay?" Mom called the doctor to ask about me. The doctor said I was recovering, and there was nothing to worry about. I had fractures and contusions, but did not suffer from any bleeding. I was lucky considering it was a car accident. "Who hit me, though?" I asked. The police officer answered that question a couple days later. He showed me the surveillance camera of the accident. In it, I was thrown into the air after being hit by the car, and then I dropped to the ground. The car disappeared from the screen, and I couldn't tell whether it stopped or not, with its red taillights barely visible. And a couple of seconds later, the light disappeared as well. The officer said the car rammed the guardrail after hitting me, and he asked if I remembered anything. At that very moment, the voice struck in my head. "It'll be more painful to live than to die." And the night of the accident replayed in my head. The headlights zooming down in my direction, the car that I saw as I was thrown up in the air, the shock of crashing down onto the asphalt road, and the taillight growing faint. The officer asked, "Are you feeling okay? Did you remember anything?" I looked at him. I realized it was Jin's car. The officer said, "Even if it's a small thing?" I shook my head and said, "No, I just have a headache." Yoongi, 13 June, year 22. I went to see Jungkook in the hospital, but couldn't walk into his room. From the hospital door, he looked dead. I turned around. I couldn't bear to look at him. Ever since we came back from the trip to the beach, Jungkook stopped showing up at my workroom. I tried to remember the last time I saw Jungkook. The last time was when we were coming back from the trip. I was talking to Hobie about music. Without a word to us, Jungkook ran ahead. I thought he had something to do and would show up later, but then he got into an accident. So many things reeled in front of my eyes. The fire crackling in an empty drum at the construction site. My mom's room always with no lights on. The piano sound coming from the flames. Jungkook clumsily playing the piano at a music store. Jungkook fallen on the empty road, and the fear and pain he must have felt as he slowly lost consciousness. Jungkook was lying in there, looking like a dead person, and I staggered out of the hospital. I drank. I had to be liquored up to forget this fear. I got kicked out of the bar and roamed the streets, and I fell down somewhere on the street and slept. When I woke up, I was running. No, I was having that dream of running. But I wasn't a kid. I was a high schooler. I was running in the dark streets, and it was urgent. I didn't look around. My feet were running to take me to the destination. Where was I going? What was the urgency? It felt like this had happened before, but I couldn't remember. And I lost my balance and sprained my ankle. When I was thrown off and fell headlong in the dream, I woke up, kicking my feet. It was night. Because of the booze, my heart was pounding, and things were spinning around me. When I tried to stand up from the crumpled position I had been in, my joints screamed. Holding on to the wall for support, I managed to walk. I had no destination. I didn't care where I was going. The passers-by frowned and avoided me. I was always like this. I had no destination and no purpose, and there was no way I would run now just because someone told me to run, and the people around me found me upsetting or scary. Staggering around, I suddenly looked around. I was on the road where I had run out of breath in my dream. Where was I going in such a hurry? What was I looking for? No one told me to do it, and no one was chasing me, but why was I running like that? I saw the green light across the crosswalk. In the dream, I crossed the road, although the signal had turned red. Cars honked, and some came to a screeching halt. I ignored all that and ran with my eyes fixed in front of me. Like in the dream, I started to pick up speed. I felt nauseous, but I took deep breaths. I crossed the road. For no reason, I felt urgent and started to run. It was nothing like the speed I had in the dream, but I still ran. And I saw before me the same scene from my dream. I ran past the elementary school and the police station, and I crossed the road. And what I was seeing now overlapped with the scene in my dream. I arrived at the front gate of Songjujil High School. The place I ran into my dream was my school, the place I hadn't set foot in after I got expelled. I couldn't believe it. I looked up at the classrooms. The lights were on in every classroom. Brightly lit rooms were not a part of my high school memories. In the dream, I ran past the dark playground into the classroom turned storage in the old building. When I opened the door, it smelled dusty and smoky. The desks were thrown down on the floor everywhere, and a pile of boxes was in one corner. I stood by the door and looked inside. It had been 2 years since I had spent most of my days here. Was I a different person from back then? Or was I still the same? Was I the one who came running and panting here in the dream? Or was that the me from back then? I saw the piano in the opposite corner. There was a thin layer of dust settled on the piano, which had not been touched for a very long time. I brushed off the dust with my hand, and when I opened the top, the white keys shone faintly in the dark. I brought my phone and used it as a flashlight. I pressed down on a key. The key made an odd sound, a note that was between notes. It was the same with every key. The untuned piano lost its voice and became out of order. I plopped on the floor. My arm with the burn wound that had not healed yet chafed against the piano, sending a twinging sensation. I remembered Jungkook in his hospital bed and the house burning down in the fire, and I had heard a piano melody over those images. What was I running away from? From a person? From an attachment? Memories? Music? Myself? In retrospect, I realized I had happy moments because of Jungkook, Tae, and the other friends. Moments I didn't think I could have. And this classroom turned storage was a part of that. Had I ever laughed from my heart since then? Had I wanted to stay alive since then? I touched a piano leg. The piano wood being old and rustic felt rough to my hand. And when I tried to stand up, I suddenly remembered there must be music scores here somewhere. I bent over the piano and rummaged through what was under the piano frame with my hands. The scores were buried in the corner. I'd forgotten. I put them there. I couldn't throw them away or keep them. Music, the scores, piano, and, well, myself. I remembered that night. The day I came running to this place, the day when my expulsion was decided. The day when I was given the verdict that I was no longer allowed into this classroom. I got drunk, and feeling desperate, I came running here. I didn't know why I felt so desperate then. It was fear. Without this place, I would never do or play music again. I was desperate to find out that would not be the case. So I'd come running and panting to open this classroom door. I stood in front of the piano. I gingerly pressed the keys, and then some more keys. The odd melody spilled into the dark room. My heart was still pounding hard. Sweat trickled down my temple and fell onto a key. What should I play? What was the next note? My heart faltered. Should the next note be sharp or flat, or a variation of the melody? Feeling as if someone was judging my music, I swung around. I played a couple more notes, but I couldn't focus. What was I feeling? I couldn't figure out what was making me so muddled. I was afraid of pressing down on a key, and it seemed impossible to play. The piano was pushing me away. I pressed down on the keys harder. Meaningless notes echoed in what used to be our lair. I got mad and started to press any key and screamed, "That's not the emotion!" Suddenly, I stopped. My mom used to say that. The words I hated to hear most. I tried playing the note that had disappeared in my life. I couldn't move my fingers. It was the note that was everywhere in my music scores, the note that I didn't even think about when I played the piano with my friends, and the note that I couldn't play anymore after being made to dread it. I couldn't remember what I felt that night. I could have felt hopeless or felt like giving up. I returned to my place and threw away my mom's piano keyboard that I had savaged from the burned down house. And I decided I would never play the piano ever again. In hindsight, it was a very stupid thing to do. Nothing changed just because I had thrown away my mom's keyboard. I couldn't stop playing the piano or give up music. But since that day, I hadn't played that note. The note was nowhere in the music I wrote. I realized why I'd been so mean to Jungkook when he came to see me in my workroom. He kept playing that note. Why did he do that without knowing anything? I looked down on the scores under the piano frame. I played a melody that was on the scores. It sounded strange from the piano being out of tune. The strange sound became a strange melody and strange music. Memories of my high school days trickled out with the melody. Hobie was playing around, hugging me from behind as I was playing the piano. He said, "You should play the piano properly, with your hair parted right in the middle and an expensive suit on." And to that, Jungkook said, "I'll buy you a bow tie on your birthday." And when I told them to piss off, Jungkook and Hobie pretended as if they were scared of me. Junie, who was reading a book by the window, said, "Hey, slow down. Yoongi is a super slow runner. He runs like a grandpa." Jin, chuckling at what Junie had said, took out his camera from his bag. Jimin smiled as he made a pose for the camera on the piano stool. "Together with the future music maestro." Everyone's laughter filled our lair, and Jin captured it all with his camera. I also recorded that day in my own way, the day when we'd all laughed together, the happiest day of our lives, and the time we spent together. That was in my music. And after playing a note, I stepped back from the piano, feeling as if electrocuted or my fingertips were on fire. For a moment, I was cut off from all my memories with my hands frozen in midair. Chills went down my back. It was that note, the one that I'd thrown away with my mom's keyboard and made disappear from my life. I rummaged through the scores. The note was everywhere. Back then, I had no qualms about writing that note down. Back then, I used that note without giving it a thought. The note I thought had disappeared from my life. I remembered what Jungkook said. "It's because I like your music. When I listen to your music, I want to live. What I'm saying is, your music is like what's in my heart." I saw a flashlight outside the classroom. I ducked under the piano top. A security guard said, "Who's there?" He came in and looked around. "A ghost playing the piano or what?" I sneaked out while he went to look at the other side of the classroom. I ran to the hospital and walked into Jungkook's room. Junie and Tae turned and said, "Are you drunk?" Jimin, 14 June, year 22. How do you like being back home? Hobie asked as he showed up at the Just Dance practice room. He sounded indifferent, but he looked worried. Ever since he paid a visit to Jungkook in the hospital, he had been down. Behind him, I saw cars whizzing by with headlights on. If the seven of us could really become one, Hobie would be like our guardian, always taking care of us. But he wasn't really as carefree or outgoing on the inside as he seemed on the outside. He acted that way because he thought that's how he should or ought to be, more or less. He responded more sensitively to the pain and hurt of the people around him, and he suffered because of it. And he tried to liven up the mood more because of it. Do you know why I went back home? And when I said that, Hobie turned around. Well, you said I wasn't honest about my narcolepsy, and I felt ashamed. But I felt encouraged at the same time. Hobie smiled. You smiled. Hearing that, he waved his hand and adamantly denied he'd done such a thing. I left him and got on the bus. I saw him growing distant, and I thought, well, what I said to him was half true and half not. He seemed pretty cool as he came clean about having told lies, but that didn't help me muster up courage. It had been a month since I ran away from the hospital. I went back home, signed up at a Hagwon for the high school certificate program, and became a member of Just Dance. While I struggled to adapt to the world, time flew by. I hadn't had a fit, but on days that looked rainy, I became terrified. Am I really okay? I thought, looking at the night streets of Seongju. I had been locked up and in the hospital for 2 years because the people decided that I was sick. And that decision was still valid. After I ran away from the hospital, my parents officially had me discharged, but that did not mean I had been cured. The symptoms were simply lurking inside me like a monster catching his breath in some alleyway. When I got off the bus and walked into my apartment complex, the air felt moist. I rubbed my arms and walked on. Am I okay? Am I really okay now? Junie, 15 June, year 22. When I got to the containers, I saw a small shadow crouched next to one. It was a little past 11 at night. There were a range of people living in the containers. Some were alone like me, and a single mother was raising her baby. I heard one man had a gambling debt and was hiding from loan sharks, not conducive to creating a good environment. The area was littered with booze bottles and cigarette butts, and it sank into darkness as soon as the sun set. Not the best conditions for children to be growing up in. On the way back from the trip to the countryside, Tay told me about a nightmare with us in it, and how it almost became a reality. Jin, cold and impassive, was helping us, but he seemed to have forgotten about us too. And Tay added in the end, "You don't believe me, do you?" I was the same way. No one knew what Jin had been up to ever since we came back from the trip to the beach. I remembered how he showed up at my gas station all of a sudden after 2 years. If what Tay said was true, it wasn't a coincidence that he simply showed up that day. He had come to help me then, and Tay's dream ended here, with me getting killed in the container fire. I walked over to the child. "Your grandma's not back yet?" He shook his head. "Well, let's go to my place and have instant noodles." The boy gobbled down the hot noodles. "Your name is Uchang, right? Song Uchang?" The boy nodded and asked, "Well, what's your name?" "Kim Namjoon." "Do you gamble too?" "Me? No." "An alcoholic?" I couldn't believe what he had just said, and with a sigh, I said, "There are a lot of people here who make an honest living, you know." Hobie, 16 June, year 22. This isn't what I ordered. When I looked up, I saw a customer with a burger on a tray looking irritated. Embarrassed, I checked the order slip, but a part-timer placed a different burger on the tray and said, I'm so sorry, ma'am. Hearing that, I also bowed an apology. The part-timer threw a glance at me. Is something going on with you? Now, this had happened so many times lately, making me embarrassed in front of the part-timers. I left the counter, and from the window, I watched students in school uniform passing by. I remembered Jungkook in the hospital bed, all bandaged up. I had yelled at him for not letting us know, but I didn't mean it. In my mind, I kept seeing the orphanage aunt, whose surgery was coming up soon. I looked around the burger joint. It was crowded with people enjoying their burgers, chatting and laughing. But me, I felt frustrated and helpless. Jimin, 17 June, year 22. I crashed onto the ground after colliding with someone. I had just come out of the Hagwon to study for the high school certification. Startled and scared, a boy looked up at me and burst into tears. I helped him stand up and said, "It's okay, it's okay." I noticed his knees were scraped and bleeding. Seeing drops of blood, I compulsively turned my head. Memories that I didn't want to be reminded of occupied my head. I bolted up and turned around. Someone asked if we were okay. I couldn't tell if he was asking about me or the boy. I gulped and focused hard. I felt a seizure coming on. No, I was looking for signs to tell me I was about to have a fit. I was flooded with fear that I might have to go back the way things were. I started to walk fast and then to run. I rushed to escape from the place. I stopped, out of breath. I found myself in an alley I'd never been in. I swung around to find no one there. Junie, 18 June, year 22. When I asked him if we could meet, Jin took his time, but he said yes. We met at a street pub near Sungju Station. It was the end of a weekend, and the people at the street pub had no intention of going home. From the pub, I could see an old, decrepit commercial building waiting for redevelopment. A few places like that were left in Sungju. A couple of middle-aged men came out of the street pub across the road, walked away, singing. We gulped down our first drinks even before they brought us the side dishes that we'd ordered. "How you doing?" Jin answered without any emotion whatsoever. He didn't tell me anything of himself, and he didn't ask about me or the other friends. The pub owner brought us the side dishes, but we didn't touch them. When Tay had told me those strange stories, I couldn't believe them and felt a sense of foreboding. I'd known Jin, and I was close to him. But who is this person in front of me now? "When was the last time you drank?" I asked him with the cup in my hand, and Jin just looked at me. I began telling him my story. When I turned the corner to my house, I saw our furniture and kitchen things piled up on the ground. I was carrying my dad on my back from the hospital when I saw our stuff dragged out of the house. "Namjoon, what should we do?" my mom said desperately. "Apparently my brother got into a fight with the landowner's son when they showed up for the overdue rent. Fortunately, the supermarket owner let us stay in a storage room next to the market. I lay my father inside and carried our stuff to the room. When we were done, it was night. My mom placed chopsticks in my hand and told me to eat something, but I couldn't swallow a thing. Seeing all our stuff stacked up in one corner of that storage place, man, I just wanted to drop dead. I walked out and sat on a beach outside the supermarket. When my mom asked me where Namhyun was, I yelled at her. How should I know? Namjoon, Namjoon, Namjoon. I was sick and tired of everything. I regretted telling my brother he should always hold his head high. We could get by a couple of days in the storage room, but I didn't know what to do after that. I was blank. And then the supermarket owner handed me a can of beer, and that was the first time I tasted booze. I was 16, I think. Now, Jin listened, emotionless. Isn't that funny? And I asked again, when was the first time you drank? I don't know, he answered, not wanting to be bothered. I said, and when you came to see me at the gas station for the first time, why did you ask me to look into Jungkook? Jin frowned a little, as if asking what was the point of all this. Turning his head around, he spat out, just because I thought it would be nice to see everybody. He was lying. That night, when we had all decided to get together at the container, he refused. Our conversation came to a stop. When I brought up our days in high school, he would change the topic or react with irritation. He was not the person I used to know. He wasn't interested in us and was impassive to our memories together. Have you heard of the map of the soul? He suddenly asked. It was the first time ever for him to ask me something at that street pub. What's that? Is it a map of some place? It's something I have to find, something that can end all this. And he didn't finish. He shook his head as if he shouldn't have said it at all. When we came out of the pub, it was close to midnight. He turned around after a short goodbye, and I said to his back, you know, I thought you were like me. He looked back very briefly and then walked on, and I watched him as he walked away. I knew the first time Jin had drunk. It was in my second year of high school. We'd skipped classes and snuck out of school only to get ourselves into a scuffle with some thugs. There were 4 of us, Jin, Jimin, Tae, and me. The end of the scuffle was obvious. None of us knew how to fight. We got our asses kicked, and when the thugs left, we were panting under the bridge by the Yangtze Stream. Jimin went and bought cans of beer. Or was it Tae? Jin opened one clumsily. We cheered half in anger and half in frustration at having our asses kicked, and guzzled down the whole can. And we ended up spending the rest of the day drunk and flushed, talking gibberish, falling asleep, and waking up again only to talk more gibberish. This is my first time tasting booze, Jin said like a confession. Someone asked him, is there anything else you haven't tried yet? We could do it all today. Jin had thrown a punch and drunken booze for the first time, but he didn't remember that day at all. Jin, 18 June, year 22. A time loop is funny. Junie and I had a drink in one of the time loops at the street pub where we were drinking now. This kind of thing happened often in time loops. When I turned a corner, I always met the same person, and when I woke up one day, it was always raining. Things that were fated to happen did happen. And sometimes everything got tangled up from one tiny mistake. It made me think that maybe we were... No. Everything in this world was bound with a sturdy rope supporting everything else. It was impossible for one person to figure out how that rope was tied. I didn't want to know it in the first place. All I wanted was to avoid making errors and mistakes and escape from the time loop. As I'd expected, Junie talked about some useless stuff. Maybe that was what Tae had told him to do. I thought you were like me. The last thing Junie said, and my head ached again. I remembered what Junie had said here in one of the loops. Now I know everything about you, but don't you think your friends are still waiting for you? Without understanding what had happened back then? What he meant by back then was back in the high school days when I had to spy for the principal. I couldn't believe stuff like that was still important. 2 years had passed since then, and I had experienced countless time loops. Back then had happened ages ago, and it meant nothing now. Jungkook, 20 June, year 22. A witness had stepped forward. The detective came to see me again a couple days ago. He asked for my guardian, but my mom didn't come to see me that day. He had no choice but to tell me that the witness had come forward but had not provided much information except that the car was imported and the driver was a young man in his early or mid-20s. The detective asked me again if I remembered anything, and I said nothing, and that was a lie. "What are you thinking about?" Hobie said, standing next to my bed. "I stopped by on my way to the practice room. How are you feeling? Are you feeling better?" He had the worried look which he always had. I nodded and said, "They say I can walk around with crutches tomorrow." Hobie smiled and took out a burger meal. "A special burger set for you. It's called Tyrannosaurus Burger. You know, you've got hearty bones like a Tyrannosaurus." And our conversation turned to the life in the hospital and school things. He said Junie routinely stopped by a library on his way to the gas station, but he didn't know why Tay was busy. "Well, how about Jin?" I waited for the right timing and asked, "Jin?" Hobie hasn't changed since high school. He was not good at hiding his feelings. "Something's up with him, isn't it?" Hobie flushed, looked somewhere else, and said, No. I thought he knew something, and that Jin was somehow involved with my car accident. I remembered the first time they came to see me in the hospital, and even then, I felt like they knew something. "You feel hurt? Should I call the nurse?" Hobie said in a worried voice. I didn't know it, but I was bracing my head. Jimin, 23 June, year 22. I simply had my eyes fastened on my name as it appeared on the screen in the waiting room. With the scent of rain, I couldn't calm myself down. Afraid of bumping into someone I knew, I had my head down. My vision was filled with an endless line of shoes, someone barefooted with slippers and a patient gown, someone with wet shoes, and someone trudging along with an IV. Only when I had run down the stairs did I take a long breath and sigh. I stood in front of the emergency room door for a while. Maybe I wasn't ready. When I got to the first floor lobby, I saw rain falling down outside and remembered that I had left my umbrella by a bench in the waiting room. As I turned around, I saw a familiar face in the distance. It was Jin. I wondered why he was there. I remembered how he'd scowled and rubbed his forehead the whole time on the way to the beach. Even after hearing about Jungkook's accident, he didn't go see him in the hospital. Was he too sick to pay him a visit? When I was about to say hi, he greeted someone, a doctor in a white gown. I was close enough to overhear their conversation. "If your headache is too serious, you should get an MRI exam," the doctor said. Jin nodded and said, "Doc, have you heard of the map of the soul?" "I'm not sure. Is it a psychological term?" The doctor apologized for not giving him a definite answer, and Jin said it was all right, and the two disappeared around the corner. The map of the soul? I'd heard it before, but where? When? I couldn't remember. And with that, we will close out the night on page 94. Say goodnight to Chim Chim once he's in focus. There we go. How is everyone doing? Already, we did more than an hour. Wow. Boy, this is something. Well, I hope you enjoyed as much as you can enjoy that story. That's a tough one. Yeah, that how am I liking it, Joyce? It's powerful. It's I tell you what I can say is in the story they talk about, particularly Jin talks about these flashes that go on in his brain and how he starts to see these memories flash back and forth of this time loop and this time loop and this scenario. And some of the other guys do that too with their dreams and their memories. And as I'm reading the story, that's how it feels in my brain, because I see these flashes of the stories of the music videos. Now, could I get a bunch of yarn and tie all the pieces together? No. But it's interesting to see. It's almost like the way that I took this journey by going through all of the music videos and just kind of trying to interpret it. Now going through the story, it actually makes me feel like I'm experiencing the story with them, because I have these memories of the videos, and it's these flashes that come together, and I can't quite put all the pieces together. So it's almost like I feel like one of the guys going through the story. It's wild. Yeah, it's pretty wild. There are a lot of scenes that I can see pretty clearly. You know, Sugar in the Street, the piano, the music, the fire. Like, yeah, pretty awesome. It is very brilliant how they did all this. So tomorrow, I'll give you a quick heads up for those of you that did not see it. Tomorrow we will be doing this earlier and probably longer. So it's going to start almost 4 hours earlier. So that's 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So 3 hours and 45 minutes earlier than we have been doing it. And ideally we'll get at least 2 hours. Okay? If all goes well. And then I think, as of right now, no matter what, we'll have this done by the weekend. Well, by the end of the weekend. As always, I hope you enjoyed. I hope this helps you sleep. I hope you feel better than when you got here. I will see you, and you will hear me tomorrow. Look out for each other. Boop, club.